Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back your host, Bob Perciasepe.
What kind of an applause was that? Welcome back, everyone, and I hope everything has been going as well for you as it has been for me this morning. We've had some really, really amazing and interesting discussions and a lot of information to share. So I'm really pleased that we have this luncheon presentation, and we're going to start in a minute. You know, as you're settling in, I also have a few reminders. I want to make sure, and you should really be concentrating on this, that everyone is thinking about the tours tomorrow afternoon. We have some really interesting solar installations coupled with a park. You can play tennis while you're looking at it, shoot some hoops, and some really interesting buildings. So I really, if you don't have the app and haven't gone through that or haven't gone to the website to sign up, you can certainly go to the registration desk and do it. So I don't want anybody to miss that if they really want to do it. I also want to thank our gold level sponsor. And the ambassador, I think, just walked in. Canada is our gold level sponsor, so thank you so much. And also, thank you for your participation yesterday and today. It's been really fabulous to have you with us. So we heard quite a bit during the course of today and even yesterday about how businesses in America and across the world are starting to think about climate change and starting to take bolder and bolder steps. So this next panel is really to talk about what the leaders of businesses are really thinking. So I'm going to ask Jamie Gentoso, who's the CEO of U.S. Cement Operations for LafargeHolcim, and Gerry Anderson, the Executive Chairman of DTE Energy, and Bob Holycross, who you've heard from yesterday as well, Vice President of Sustainability, Environment, and Safety Engineering for the Ford Motor Company, to come on up. I know you can stand up and come on up and join me up here. So I have a little bit of an introduction because what we're going to talk about is something I want to make sure everybody in the audience knows about it. All of us on the stage here, the three companies and the Center for Climate and Energy Solution, are involved with an initiative called the CEO Climate Dialogue. And the CEO Climate Dialogue was launched in May of last year. And there were some discussions before that, but it's launched in terms of talking about it publicly last year. And it's 21 companies and 4 NGOs, and we're spending time trying to look at what would the characteristics be, what would the principles be of a overarching climate policy at the federal level based on market mechanisms or market-based solutions. And in that process, the group has identified a number of principles, and I want to outline those principles briefly here so to provide some context for the conversation. So the 5, oops, where'd they go? Hold on.
You don't have a
Can't do the 5 principles from memory yet.
That was part of our initiation.
Here we go. Too many papers. So obviously the first principle is the most important one, or actually they're all very important, but this is what's driving doing it: significantly reduce U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. And this is not only to look at in the long term by the middle of the century, but also interim steps along the way. Be effective, that the policy enacted will actually achieve the result we're trying to do. I'm going to be quick here so we can get to the discussion. That they be market-based, that we use the power of the market to drive the investment and the innovation that is needed to solve some of the problems we have before us. Durable and responsive, so that there's some ability to respond to it, but durability is probably translated best into something that can be counted on over a longer period of time, so the investments can be made with some degree of certainty that this is the policy that's going to help drive us, that we don't have a pendulum of policy swinging back and forth. And that usually translates into something that has to be bipartisan in our current world here in the US, that it does no harm. And I think this is important because there's a lot of issues related to how you would use a market-based approach, but we need to make sure, and this came up in some of the discussions earlier, that there isn't leakage between countries or in different, if the United States is doing something, how do we deal with that? That it doesn't undermine other climate objectives, and it also safeguards against the negative impacts on both biodiversity, water, and any issues that may come up with over-impacted communities. So these are the key principles that we have. And so what I'd like to do, and this was derived from the discussions between the companies and the NGOs, what I'd like to ask each of you, and we'll just go down. Jamie, you're gonna get to go first.
Excellent.
You sat there.
Yeah, not by choice.
And really lay out in a couple of minutes, why is your company involved with this? What's motivating your interest in this kind of a process with a bunch of companies and a bunch of NGOs, and then actually talking to members of Congress about it? So Jamie, we'll go with you first.
Sure. So thank you very much. Great to be here today. Besides the health and safety of our people who work for our company, as well as the people who come onto our sites, this topic is probably is the most important for us. So LafargeHolcim is the largest cement manufacturer in the world, as well as here in the United States. 1 in 5 projects in the US has our cement on it. And the cement industry produces 7 to 8% of the CO2 that's produced in the world annually. So for us, a very hot topic. And that CO2 that we produce, part of it come from combustion emissions, 40%, and 60% of it come from process emissions. So these process emissions are really a function of making cement, right? So it's the calcining process where we take limestone and we drive off a CO2 to get free lime. So those are what we call fact-of-life emissions that we will never be able to overcome. So for us, this is an extremely hot topic, something that we'll be working with. Cement is the second most consumed product in the world next to water. So that's why we make up 7 to 8%. And it'll continue to be a fact of life that concrete will be used as a building material because it is the best building material. And also when you look at it from the fact of embodied energy and CO2, it is the least of any of the building materials that are out there. So we as an industry need to continue to work toward reducing our CO2 footprint. And we believe that is our job, and we will continue to do it. So the CO2 Climate Dialogue gave us the opportunity to work with like-minded CEOs that felt the same as we did, knowing that we need an economy-wide price on carbon in order to achieve what we'd like to achieve, which we feel is fully decarbonizing the cement industry. And that will only come through investment. And also the principles that we see here, we really stand behind. So in the end, it was a great fit for us. And if we're trying to get to a better world, it's what we needed to do.
Thanks. Gerry.
Well, thanks, Bob. And being from Detroit, I'm glad to see a crowd of this size here. So thank you for being here in our home city. So, this is kind of an on the one hand and on the other hand answer for me. So on the one hand, I remember 3 years ago, 3+ years now, just being depressed after the Clean Power Plan got shelved, and I had put a lot of personal work into that, and just felt like that was all thrown away. On the other hand, 3+ years later, our industry is in a place that I certainly never anticipated we would be, and I don't think any of the leaders in the industry did. So it looks like 2019, the electric power industry will be down over 30%. That was actually the Clean Power Plan goal for 2030. So we're essentially a decade ahead, and the industry is committed to a 50% reduction by 2030. This isn't any company, it's the industry, and 80% longer term. I never anticipated that 3 years ago. So this has begun to move, and I say to people, our industry's rolling, and it's going to keep rolling, and it's driven by a lot of things. So I feel good about that. On the other hand, the science on this topic is really clear. We need to move to a broad economy-wide solution. We need to do it fast. And so fundamentally, we're in because there's power in coalitions to deliver messages. And this is a really interesting coalition. This is not a coalition of cheerleader companies who really don't emit CO2, but wish the companies who do would do something about it. These are the big emitters, and certainly the electric power industry, the automotive industry. Transportation is now really the lead horse in the country. Got transportation industry involved, cement, big petrochemical industry. We have several, Shell, BP. So we've got the people who have their strategic futures at stake out telling policy leaders that we need to do something about this, and it needs to be fundamental, and it needs to be now. That's a good thing. So I really liked the feel of the coalition when we were asked to join it. And then finally, I really like our NGO partners. So C2ES, obviously, but the Nature Conservancy, EDF, WRI are all organizations who want to see this issue dealt with fundamentally and quickly, but also are committed to the science and the facts in terms of what's going to be required to make that happen. And for companies whose strategic futures are at stake, dealing with partners who understand that we've got to work this in a way that sort of comports with the reality of what it'll take to work through those challenges it's a group we like to work with. So fundamentally, it's about delivering the message we need to move economy-wide, fundamentally, quickly, but it's a great coalition to be part of.
Thanks. Bob.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and thanks, Bob, for having us here, and thanks everybody for being here as well. I mean, certainly for transportation, as Gerry touched on, this isn't a new issue, and it certainly isn't a new issue for Ford Motor Company either, right? In terms of the journey that we've been on in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions footprint around the globe, the recognition on what we need to do to get ahead of the climate crisis, given everything that's continues to happen year over year. From a corporate standpoint, we've recognized the need and have aligned around the Paris Climate Accord, have been in that position for several years. But the obviously we're not going to be able to get there on our own as a company or as a transportation industry. It is going to take all of us together, and because of the urgency, this is the perfect opportunity for us to get together, and especially with all the advances in technology across our industries that are going to enable some new solutions that we probably haven't considered as holistically in the past, certainly within transportation, but even more broadly than that. So in order to get the ball rolling more than I think it has either inside our individual companies or even in the industry, having a collective commitment at the highest level of our companies, sends the signal that we're ready to go. We can do it across industry, we can do it across government, party, political lines, and for a company like Ford on an international level, collectively is going to be important. So we're excited to be a part of it. We look forward to others joining, quite frankly, and the time is now.
Well, it's great, and I'll touche to all of you. It's great to work with the leadership of so many businesses who are trying to work their way through all these issues. And I have a couple of specific questions for you guys, and then I'm keeping my eye on the clock so we can get some questions from the audience. But Gerry, I'll start with you on this. And knowing all of you and the work you're doing, I know that none of your companies are waiting for this to happen. I want to make that clear. It's not like you're saying, well, we'll see if we can get this legislation or something, and meanwhile, you're all going already, and you're starting to see, what what the path holds for you and what might be out there and what the problems might be. So maybe it would be helpful, Gerry, from your perspective, thinking of the power industry. What are some of the constraints? What are some of the barriers or challenges, perhaps is the best way to describe it?
Now, that's a great question, Bob. So, you know, soon after that depressing event of the Clean Power Plan getting shelved in early 2017, we committed to a 80% reduction by 2050, and then subsequently we have upped that as we've learned more. So we did a lot of modeling to convince ourselves we could do the 80. As we've been learning more, we've upped that to 50% by 2030, 80% by 2040, and net zero by 2050. And I have to tell you, we're doing a lot of engineering and economic modeling of what that future looks like. And we aren't the only ones. There are a lot of people pushing deeply into, if we're really going to decarbonize the power sector and ultimately the economy, what technologies will we need and what challenges and barriers will we hit? And there are two challenges that are showing up in the work of almost everybody that I respect working on this, and I'll describe those two, and they're related actually. One of them is the challenge of seasonal storage. And if you're not familiar with this topic, I'd suggest you learn about it because it's a big deal. So for the foreseeable future, you know, going to 50% and beyond carbon reductions for us, that's going to be done with a heavy dose of dominant renewable investment and as much natural gas as we need to keep the grid reliable. But as you start to push deeper, especially in a climate like this one, you begin to run up against a constraint. And that constraint is that if you live here in the winter, you'd know that we have long periods of short days and virtually no sunlight. We get heavily clouded. And our wind often goes quiet in those periods. So we get these renewable production droughts. And as you model it, what we find is we actually need to carry energy not from this afternoon into this evening, but from August into December. And that implies, as you model it, that we need not 6 hours of storage, but 6 weeks or more of storage. And when you begin to model the storage requirements of doing that with all renewables and batteries, the magnitude of the investment in batteries just goes off the charts. And it begins to be clear that, number one, it's really not feasible. But secondly, it would produce its own severe environmental implications through mining, manufacturing, and a lot of other things. We need a lot of batteries in this sector, but actually trying to produce 6 weeks of storage for the power sector would dwarf the transportation sector consumption of batteries. So what's the answer? The answer is we need zero carbon sources of dispatchable generation that runs when you tell it to. What's that going to be? Maybe hydrogen. There's a lot of attention going into hydrogen as a fuel source. Perhaps gas with carbon capture, perhaps advanced nuclear, perhaps a mix of those. We're going to need something to solve that challenge. Second challenge, grid operability. So the RTOs are getting deep into modeling how does the stability and operability of the grid become affected as you push from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50% renewables and beyond. And the answer is that it gets more and more challenging to keep the second-to-second stability and the stability over days and hours managed. What do you need to deal with that? You need zero carbon dispatchable sources of power that can complement the renewables and be there for reliability. Hydrogen, carbon capture, nuclear, or some combination. And so I think what's become clear is if we're committed to going to net zero, which we are, we need to be committed to developing these technologies because, you know, if you look at the renewable technologies that are ripe today, they took a long time to get really economically ripe. And if we start 15 years from now on this stuff, it'll be game over. So we really do need an R&D agenda today on those zero carbon production sources. So one other message I'd leave with you is I think this decarbonization is going to move through chapters, and the chapters are going to look different. There's probably a chapter for the 2020s. For us, that'll be about retiring coal, building a lot of renewables, and we're going to build some gas because that's the technology we have today to keep the grid stable. 2030s will probably be about the completion of the phase out of coal. Gas will probably begin to be lower capacity factor as the renewables continue to rise in percentage. In the 2040s, we need those zero carbon resources, and those need to come in, and the gas turbines probably need to become hydrogen turbines, and so forth. But we don't have hydrogen turbines today to keep the grid stable. We've got natural gas. And so we aren't going to have a pure story day one where we can go quickly to 100% renewables as we phase out everything that was the backbone of our grid historically. But we'll ultimately get there. Our regulatory process recently, when we suggested that we need to invest in some gas, got pretty heated. And I think one of the things that all of you who are sophisticated about this can do is help the dialogue along to help people realize we've got to work our way through these chapters to ultimately get to this net zero. So that's what I see, Bob.
Those are formidable challenges, but as you pointed out, I think the entire electric power system of the United States, has, there may be varying degrees of it, but it's out there. But I mean, decarbonizing electricity is one of the key, legs on the stool here.
Yeah, it's the precursor.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things in what we need out in the future, things like, for instance, carbon capture. Somehow, some way, we're going to probably need that. And Jamie, you guys, you pointed out in your opening comments that, even if you could heat the kiln with renewable or some advanced nuclear system to get the heat high enough to bake the calcium carbonate, you're still going to be offing carbon dioxide as part of the process.
Right.
Same thing could be said for things like fermentation and ethanol refineries and places where the actual chemistry of the industrial process creates carbon dioxide itself. So no matter what kind of clean energy you have to deal with the heat, you're still going to have the gas. And you guys, I think, are starting to look at something to try to capture that in your place here in Colorado.
Yes, so recently we announced a scoping study that we're working with a company named Savante who has some carbon capture technology. We're doing a small carbon capture unit right now on our plant in Richmond, BC, where they're capturing about 5 tons of CO2 per day. Now it's great to capture that CO2, but you need to do something with it. And we got the opportunity at our plant in Florence, Colorado to work with Savante, as well as Total and Oxy, who are also very focused on reducing their carbon footprint on this project. So our plant there produces about 1.8 million tons of cement. And the easy math, you can say every ton of cement produces a ton of CO2. So this will have there a large-scale carbon capture unit where we expect to collect over 1 million tons of CO2 annually, and it will be used for EOR. So the plant actually happens to be within about 20 miles of a pipeline for CO2 that is currently being piped from Utah down into Colorado for the use of enhanced oil recovery. So great opportunity for us to work alongside these two partners because we actually, we're going to capture the carbon and then we have a use for it. And then who knows for future, that pipeline can go back the opposite direction, right back into those CO2 mines. So.
Yeah. So if Bob is successful, the demand for that enhanced oil recovery will decline over time. But you're right. It's a source of revenue now, and oil that comes out of the ground from that is less carbon intensive than if it wasn't.
Exactly.
And using old oil wells as opposed to drilling new ones all has these other benefits in the near term. But in the long term, Bob, so let's explore a little bit further. You guys have, Ford has looked at science-based targets for the company. Obviously, like many industries, the scope 3 or the use of your products is one of the largest sources. It is in the United States now. Transportation writ large, which is more than just automobiles, is the largest source of greenhouse gases now, since the stuff that Gerry's been doing. So, what do you guys see more specifically on your horizon here to meet those science-based targets? As we go forward in the next 30 years.
Yeah, it's like it is like you said, Bob. Right, you have to kind of look at the full kind of circular aspect of it. And I mean, for us, obviously, the journey we've been on is first you got to get the products down to low levels and ultimately zero emissions vehicles or what have you. And the advancements in technology that have taken place are enabling that more and more. With battery technology, both in terms of how batteries are packaged and the range that we can get, in addition to the cost, as that starts to come down, what we're going to be able to do and see more and more as we get higher levels of the penetration of electric vehicles into the mix, is that we're going to be able to provide the same functionality that customers expect in addition to near zero and zero emissions. And for us, that's what we're most excited about over the next few years with the investment we've made most recently in our products like the Mustang Mach-E all-electric vehicle that we're launching later this year. We've announced the F-150 battery electric, and then just the other day, we made clear our plans on our transit commercial van franchise. So when you look at, for a company like Ford, where you look at these segments for us, that is, where we have leadership and where there's the greatest scale, that's where we're going to continue to get the most benefit. And that still is a big piece of it. So we're going to continue to focus on that aspect. But in addition, as these vehicles, to your point, Bob, are out on the road, the larger sources in terms of how they're operated and how they're used. And that is going to depend upon how the vehicles are powered, with more renewable energy coming into the grid. And that's going to be why the importance of these partnerships are so important right now, as we continue to look at it on a life cycle basis. When you look at a company like ours, we've done so much also on the manufacturing side of our operations in addition to the vehicles. And so by 2035, we've committed that 100% of the power that goes into our manufacturing facilities is going to be renewable. We've partnered with DTE on wind power that's powering our plants even locally. Our Dearborn assembly plant and our Wayne assembly plant down the road are going to be completely powered by renewable energy over the next couple of years. So that's still an important piece of this as well. And then ultimately for use and in operation, we do look at a broader transportation operating system and say, what are the other opportunities beyond that when it comes to more efficient transportation planning in terms of how fleets operate, and also some of the technology we have now on connectivity and how we can utilize that to get more efficient operation in the transportation system. So all these things coupled together are going to be required. And then ultimately what happens when the vehicles reach their end of their life, and potential reuse applications for batteries, whether it's using them in stationary applications or proper disposal and other types of things. So it's going to take a combination of these things, and I think with a lot of the new technologies I mentioned, that's going to enable us to get there quicker than we probably anticipated 3-5 years ago.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we leave some time for some audience stuff, but I'm going to ask you to do a couple of quickies here right down the line. One of the objectives of the CEO Climate Dialogue, along the lines of those principles, and I mentioned in my opening comments about one of the principles being durability, a policy that's broadly supported so that it's durable through multiple political gyrations over the next 20 years or so. So I think we've all been up to visit members of Congress and tell them about this effort. Just quick snapshots on what's your sense of the response to Congress when you guys go and talk to them?
Well, last November, we got the opportunity to meet with a bipartisan group of senators, and that to me was pretty exciting to see both sides of the table there, ready to talk and willing to move forward with something. So to me, being a part of that and seeing both parties at the table, I think, because we need that to happen, right, in order for this to move forward and to be sustainable and durable through time. So,
You know, I was up on the Hill this week, the last couple of days, and I can just say that the discussion 2 years ago is really different from the discussion from members yesterday. Everybody is moving, and they're moving in the right direction. Now, they aren't all in the same place, but they're in motion, just like the technologies are in motion, the industries are in motion, which is it. The reaction to our group specifically is a lot of interest that the leaders of large corporations who themselves are so affected by this would be there advocating that we do something fundamental and do it quickly. And I think it takes some who would be slower to move aback to hear that, and it makes them think. And I think it's this sort of advocacy that is the reason that the conversation today is not the same as it was 2 years ago, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you know, it even goes beyond just the climate aspects of this, right? When you think about the competitiveness of the U.S. economy and jobs, and really the future, you know, for the workforce and for all of us. So, and for companies that are global in nature, where, you know, they're not sitting still and the policies are rolling, to really get the scale and the benefits and to keep us competitive, I think that's helping to fuel the appetite as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that the competitiveness thing has worked its way into the conversation as a counterpoint to the leakage issue that, you know, if we do all this work here in the United States and no one else does, how do we deal with that? And of course, we outline in the principles, there are options to deal with that. We have about 12 minutes left, so I want to try to see if we can get some robust questions from the audience. Although we could keep doing this. So I'm going to give it a shot here. The microphones are out there, and I see a hand right here in the middle table. Make sure you identify yourself.
Hi, Andres Rodriguez with IBM. Thank you for all the insights. My question would be, when you get the opportunity to meet with these people in Washington, what are you specifically asking them for, and what are their specific concerns or their specific aha moments? What are the key topics that really seal the deal for them when having these discussions?
Well, maybe I'll start on that. So I would say that what you're specifically asking and hearing varies a lot by who you're meeting with. And you may be meeting with a fairly left-leaning activist portion of the Democratic Party, and that conversation is going to be very different from one I had yesterday from someone who's from Louisiana, big energy district, has moved, wants to do something, but isn't in the same place as them. I think this coalition says the same thing to all of them. We're here as large companies telling you that this is a critical policy issue of our time. It's time for this country to make the decision that we're going to handle this and move. And we have some principles. We're not here to tell you precisely how to do it. Do it according to these principles. Now, when I go as a power company, it tends to be a different conversation. Then I'm in the discussion about our industry. And generally that discussion is, we're moving faster than you understand, and we have the tools to do this and keep our economy competitive. So we're ready to go, and we are going, and we're supportive of policy that would shape that durably over time.
Anybody want to add?
yeah, one of the topics that, you know, we're there speaking with them about is we are an energy-intensive, trade-exposed industry. There are 2.8 billion tons of cement produced around the world, and there's 100 million tons consumed here. So we are very exposed to imports. So very concerned about that. And then, as we mentioned before, we are extremely energy intensive. So a transition period is something that's extremely important for us in our industry.
You want to add anything, Bob?
Yeah, just, I mean, I'd actually come back to as well also just the durability of the policy. So when we're meeting and we're trying to talk about what are some of the ways to help us get there, we, you know, bring forth a lot of the data and the information that makes clear, you know, how capital intensive the investments are that we have to make in getting to the goals that we all share, right? And that helps to, reinforce, the rationale for why we have to have policy that can sustain, political cycles and what have you, so that we can, be confident in the decisions we're making for the investments that we have to make. So that's one of the key pieces I know we focus on as well.
All right, next hand. There's another one in the middle here, another table back.
I don't know how you see.
Yes, hi. My question specifically is to Jamie. So about a month ago, I was at a conference at Yale where a company called Carbon Cure, a Canadian company, said they could take CO2, inject it back into concrete. It makes a stronger product. They claimed it made a stronger product, that it used less cement, and it saved money, which I'm like, well, if that happens, like, wow, it would do that. So my question to you, if you thought about doing that versus injecting what you're saving back into a pipeline to pump out more fossil fuel, that, unless I missed something, that circle didn't make sense to me.
So I'm actually on the customer advisory board for Carbon Cure, so I know the process very well. What happens when you inject CO2 back into concrete is it actually mineralizes and makes almost like a limestone again. So it is a process that works. It is a solution. It is not the solution. So when you look at it, they are injecting between 5 and 8 pounds of CO2 per cubic yard of concrete, which is 4,000 pounds total. And every yard of concrete contains about 500 pounds of cement. So again, I gave you that 1-to-1, about 500 pounds of cement will produce 500 pounds of CO2. So injecting that 5 to 8 pounds isn't really having a huge effect. But it does help, because one of the things that it does is you can take that CO2, which is typically often of an industrial byproduct, and you can reduce the amount of the cement that's actually in the mix. So if you're using 500 pounds, you may be able to reduce it by 20 pounds. So there is a net, impact that is positive. So I think Carbon Cure is a solution. It's not going to be the solution that decarbonizes the cement industry.
I'm glad you asked that question, because I've heard about Carbon Cure and wondered whether it was fundamental or sort of an edge that helped, but
Yep.
and it sounds like it helps.
It helps, yes. But it's not going to
more.
fully decarbonize our industry.
Yeah, I might ask for another question related to this, because I asked Gerry early on about the challenges, but my understanding, Jamie, is some of the challenges for converting to that kind of a product was going to bump up quickly to local and state building codes that specify a particular kind of concrete be used for very good reasons of years of experience on strength of concrete and how many rebars you need to go along with it and everything else. That kind of product needs to go through some testing to, even though it may in fact, as the questioner said, be stronger, but it still won't beat the specifications in the existing building codes. Am I mistaken there?
It can be used in any concrete. It could be used, in the end, it provides, there's testing that needs to happen. So if you've got mixed designs for concrete that require a certain amount of cement, they will have to do the testing to prove out that it still reaches the strength that's necessary. But there are also many other solutions. So there's supplementary cementitious materials. There's fly ash that's actually produced out of coal combustion that we take from the power industry that can actually replace cement in concrete. So that's widely used. We're working towards making more blended cements and getting those specified by a procuring agency. So one of the things that we constantly talk about when we go to our lawmakers is they are the biggest specifiers of concrete out there. 40% of cement or concrete goes into infrastructure. So if our DOTs and our states will specify the use of low carbon concrete, then all of our customers will use it. So it's a big push for us to push the states to procure better when they understand it more.
Okay, back there. It looks like the microphone is ready.
Yes, my name is Kevin Leahy, and thank you all for this effort. I think the time's right for this. So I'm also a veteran of the last time we tried to do this. And I remember, I won't say fondly, because it wasn't that, but I remember the companies and the leadership being attacked personally by the disinfo machine. that tried to take the effort apart, and they succeeded in part in getting some companies out of the coalition. So I wonder if the conversations move to how you're going to defend yourselves or your companies or the effort from those attacks, which are going to come.
Last time you're talking about is Waxman Markey and some of the coalitions around that?
US Cap.
Is that?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, so we were involved deeply in Waxman Markey, and I would say the tone and tenor of the discussions really moved. So there will be some out there who may attack, but I'm not picking that up. And we were worried about that in 2017 when we came out with our voluntary CO2 reduction commitment. We had a president who was pitching coal. I thought we might get tweeted out. I thought we might get Republican attacks. None of that happened. I thought the business community might come at us. They did not. In fact, the broad reaction was overwhelmingly supportive, interestingly, and I thought it would be much more mixed. As I move on Capitol Hill and talk to lawmakers, back then, you used to get lawmakers who would really come at you hard on the issue. That is not the case anymore. So I think it's different terrain. It doesn't mean that you're not right that we won't get some attack. There will be. But I don't think it'll have the intensity. The flip side is our customers, our investors, our employees, and just about every other constituency that we serve wants us to do this. And so I'm willing to take some flack from sort of the edges to do what not only I personally want to do, but almost everybody involved that matters to our company wants us to do.
Yeah, I would just echo what Gerry said as well. Absolutely. I think one of the other things that's different this time as well, especially with the CEO climate dialogue, is it's starting with a higher level set of principles as opposed to a very detailed framework at this point. And so when kind of to the question that Bob teed up about why did companies like ours join the CEO climate dialogue, the question really is, why wouldn't you? When you just look at the principles that are in play, and when you start with having a broad-based coalition of a commitment to principles, it makes it that much easier, I think, for each of us individually to defend it. But it certainly does play into all the different constituencies, as he mentioned, around what's being demanded this time. So, and when you start to look at the opportunity for how it can make us even more competitive economically, when we start to look at some of the specifics around the market-based solutions and whatnot, I think it's going to turn more away from some of the arguments of the past about the doomsday scenarios of what it could mean for the economy or what have you. We have to get on this path as we've been talking about for our competitiveness and ultimately our well-being.
I would say from our side, I think we have the benefit versus my colleagues here. Everybody knows who Ford is. Everybody knows who DTE is. Nobody knows who LafargeHolcim is. Most people don't know the difference between cement and concrete. So I think from our perspective, we're kind of leaders in the industry and stepping out and saying, hey, this is an issue for us. We recognize it. We've actually been working on it for a really long time, and we need help. We need help, we need innovation, we need money put into carbon capture, we need states to specify the right thing, we need the public to know what we're actually doing. So, I mean, in the end, I'm sure that we'll have some naysayers and such, and as people wake up and realize what the industry is doing, they may make some different decisions, but then also understand that we are doing the right things for our customers, for our employees, and for our investors.
Well, thank you, guys. There's less than a minute less, and I know I could say we could get one more question in, but then it'll take more than a minute to answer it. I'm certain of this, because I'm going to use the last 40 seconds to sort of summarize a little bit, very little bit, because you guys have said a lot. But I think, those of you who know me know I worked at EPA, and I was actually very involved with the Clean Power Plan that Gerry mentioned. I've done a few automobile standards every once in a while. I'm sure I've done a MAX standard or something on the cement industry. So I've regulated these guys in my life. And in the past, you always approach this, and this is in line with some of the themes we've been hearing in this conference. In the past, let's say when the Clean Air Act was enacted, and I might ask Bill Riley a question about this tonight, it was a long to-do list of EPA to tell them what to do, which, you know, worked. I mean, air is cleaner. The cars are infinitely cleaner than they were. You know, the emissions, nitrogen oxides, et cetera, are all controlled. But what you have now is companies saying they want to be someplace, and now they're asking the government to enact policies to help them do it, which is sort of a flip on the way it sort of seemed to work in the 90s and maybe a little bit into the aughts. So I find that refreshing. And, you know, we can all say it's not enough, it's not fast enough, because all that is true. But as soon as we can get all this stuff working on all the cylinders, you got a business community wanting to move. You got a government that has the ability to enact policies to help it move, to deal with some of the challenges that we now can identify. I think that this is all part of creating the atmosphere in Congress so that when the time comes, which is not going to be in this specific Congress, but when the time comes, we'll be able to craft some very helpful legislation. And I want to say it's not that current Congress isn't crafting some legislation that deals with some of these issues, but not with all of them. And so, and a price would certainly be the icing on the cake. I like to always use that analogy. So I really thank the work that you guys are doing. It's really going to make a difference, you know, as this process moves forward. But it really is I think a sea change over the last decade on how this has evolved. We just have to keep working harder. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
We may leave.
Wow, again, I guess I get to say wow. I mean, how great is it that, you know, we've got companies participating in the CEO Climate Dialogue and really elevating the climate change topic to the most senior levels, and their engagement on policy, that matters. I mean, I don't know how many times we're going to say that during this conference, but the engagement of companies with policymakers matters. So next, right after this, we're moving into breakout sessions. We've got breakout sessions on accelerating change through collaboration, public-private partnerships. Those are in Woodward B right here. We're going to talk about enhanced corporate disclosure to drive brand value. That's in the Crystal Room. And then in the Venetian Ballroom, transforming the transportation landscape. At 3:15, we're going to go into these exchange sessions, table topics. We have a number of table topics that are going to be in the Venetian Ballroom. I think there's 8 different table topics. As Amy said this morning, turn to page 19 in your program book, and you can see the complete list of what the exchange sessions and the table topics are going to be. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you back in this main ballroom at 4:30. Thanks again, and thank you to our speakers for all morning.